Elena Martinez crouched behind the crumbling concrete wall, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting around her. At 19, she had already earned a reputation that made seasoned soldiers twice her age respect her skills. The Barrett M82 rifle in her hands felt like an extension of her body, its weight familiar and comforting in the uncertainty of war. The mission had started like any other. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target would be moving through the valley at dawn. Elena's unit, Bravo Company, had been tasked with eliminating the target and securing vital documents. What they hadn't expected was the betrayal that would change everything. Captain Morrison had briefed them the night before. "Martinez, you'll take position on the ridge. Johnson, Williams, and Foster will provide cover, while Thompson and I move in for extraction." His voice carried the authority of someone who had led men through countless battles, but there was something in his eyes that Elena couldn't quite place. The pre-dawn air was crisp as Elena climbed to her designated position. The rocky outcrop provided perfect cover and an unobstructed view of the target zone. She checked her equipment methodically, ensuring every piece of gear was secure and functional. Her radio crackled softly with position reports from her teammates. "Ghost 1 in position," she whispered into her headset using her call sign. "Copy, Ghost 1. Stand by for target confirmation," came Thompson's response. Elena settled into her shooting stance, controlling her breathing as she scanned the valley through her scope. Years of training had taught her patience, but something felt wrong about this mission. The intelligence seemed too precise, the target too convenient. Her father, a veteran sniper himself, had always told her to trust her instincts. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elena spotted movement in the valley. A convoy of 3 vehicles moved slowly along the dirt road, exactly as predicted. Through her scope, she could see armed men in the lead and rear vehicles, with what appeared to be a civilian car in the middle. "Target acquired," she reported. 3 vehicles, approximately 12 hostiles visible. "Wait for my signal, Ghost 1. Morrison's voice came through clearly. Elena tracked the convoy's movement, her crosshairs steady on the lead vehicle. Something nagged at her about the timing, about how perfectly everything was falling into place. In her 18 months of active duty, she had learned that real combat was messy, unpredictable. This felt orchestrated. "Ghost 1, take the shot," Morrison commanded. Elena's finger hovered over the trigger. Through her scope, she could see the driver of the lead vehicle clearly, but as she prepared to fire, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission on an emergency frequency. "All units, this is command. Bravo Company mission is compromised. Abort immediately. Repeat, abort mission." Elena's blood ran cold. She keyed her radio. "Command, this is Ghost 1. Please confirm abort order." "Ghost 1, disregard that transmission," Morrison's voice cut in sharply. "Take the shot now." Elena hesitated. Protocol demanded she follow her commanding officer's orders, but the emergency transmission had used proper authentication codes. Her training warred with her instincts as she tried to process what was happening. "Ghost 1, I said take the shot." Morrison's voice was angry now. Elena made a decision that would haunt her. She pulled her finger away from the trigger. "Negative, Captain. Requesting confirmation from command." The explosion that followed nearly threw her from her position. The ridge erupted in dust and debris as mortar rounds rained down around her. Elena rolled behind larger rocks as shrapnel whistled overhead. Her radio erupted with panicked voices. "We're taking heavy fire." "Where did that come from?" "Ghost 1, what's your status?" Elena pressed her back against the rocks, her mind racing. The mortars were coming from behind their position, not from the valley. Someone had known exactly where her team would be positioned. As the barrage continued, a horrifying realization dawned on her. Through a gap in the rocks, she saw Morrison and Thompson running toward an extraction point that hadn't been part of the original plan. They moved with purpose, not panic, and they weren't trying to reach her position or help Johnson, Williams, and Foster, who were still under fire. Elena's radio crackled with static, then Morrison's voice came through clearly. "Command, this is Morrison. Target neutralized. Requesting immediate extraction." Elena's heart stopped. She was still alive, still in position, and the convoy in the valley had scattered after the first mortar rounds. Morrison was lying to command, reporting her death and mission success when neither was true. The mortars stopped as suddenly as they had started. Elena remained motionless, listening to the sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Through her scope, she watched as Morrison and Thompson were extracted by aircraft that definitely weren't part of their original mission support. "Johnson, Williams, Foster, do you copy?" she whispered into her radio. Silence. Elena spent the next hour carefully making her way to her teammates' positions. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Johnson lay motionless behind his machine gun, a piece of shrapnel through his neck. Williams had been caught in the open during the mortar attack, his body torn apart by the blast. Foster was alive but barely conscious, blood seeping from multiple wounds. "Foster, can you hear me?" Elena knelt beside him, applying pressure to his wounds. Foster's eyes struggled to focus. "Elena? Morrison? Sold us out." His voice was barely a whisper. "What do you mean?" "Heard him. On the radio. Before the attack. Coordinates. Our coordinates." Foster's eyes rolled back, and Elena quickly checked for a pulse. He was alive, but needed immediate medical attention. Elena activated her emergency beacon, hoping genuine rescue forces would respond before enemy troops found them. As she waited, Elena's mind pieced together the betrayal. Morrison had sold out his own team, probably for money or to cover some other operation. The mission had been designed to eliminate witnesses, with Elena being the primary target due to her skills and what she might have observed. The sound of approaching vehicles made Elena grab her rifle and move to a defensive position. Through her scope, she saw uniformed soldiers with proper identification approaching cautiously. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Lieutenant Colonel Harris, her father's old friend and commanding officer. "Colonel Harris, this is Sergeant Martinez," she called out, standing with her hands visible. Harris approached with his medic team. "Elena, thank God you're alive. We received your emergency beacon. What happened here?" As the medics worked on Foster, Elena gave Harris a detailed report of the mission, the betrayal, and Morrison's escape. Harris listened grimly, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Elena, this is bigger than you realize," Harris said quietly. "Morrison has been under investigation for selling intelligence to enemy forces. Your team was getting close to evidence that would have exposed him. So he decided to eliminate us?" "It appears so. The convoy you were supposed to target was actually carrying our own intelligence operatives. If you had taken that shot, it would have been an international incident that Morrison could have blamed on bad intelligence." Elena felt sick. She had almost killed friendly forces based on Morrison's lies. Her decision to hesitate had saved not only her life, but prevented a catastrophic mistake. "What happens now, sir?" Harris looked at the devastation around them. "Now we have a problem. Morrison reported you dead and the mission successful. Officially, you don't exist anymore. If we surface you too quickly, it could compromise the investigation and alert other conspirators." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You're saying I have to stay dead?" "For now, yes. We'll arrange for you to be transferred to a classified unit while we build our case against Morrison and anyone else involved. Your death will give us the time we need to investigate without raising suspicions." Foster was loaded onto a medical helicopter, still unconscious but stable. As Elena watched her teammate being flown to safety, she realized her old life was over. Morrison had tried to kill her and succeeded in destroying the person she used to be. Over the next several weeks, Elena found herself in a strange limbo. Officially dead, she was housed at a classified training facility where she underwent intensive debriefing and additional training. The investigation into Morrison's activities revealed a network of corruption that reached higher than anyone had imagined. Colonel Harris visited her regularly, updating her on the progress of the investigation. "We've identified at least 6 other officers involved in selling intelligence. Morrison was just the visible tip of a much larger operation." "How long until I can return to normal duty?" Harris's expression was grim. "Elena, there might not be a normal duty to return to. The people Morrison was working with have resources and connections throughout the military. Even after we arrest them, there could be others who view you as a threat." Elena spent her days training and her nights planning. The betrayal had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The naive trust she had once placed in the military hierarchy was gone, replaced by a cold determination to see justice done. After 2 months in hiding, Elena received devastating news. Morrison had been promoted and transferred to a prestigious assignment at headquarters. The investigation had stalled due to lack of evidence, and several key witnesses had either disappeared or died in accidents. "They're covering it up," Elena said flatly during her meeting with Harris. "We're still working on building a case, but yes, it appears Morrison has powerful allies protecting him." Elena made a decision that night. If the system wouldn't deliver justice for Johnson, Williams, and Foster, she would find another way. Using the skills the military had taught her, she began planning her own investigation. Elena's first step was gathering intelligence on Morrison's current activities. Using contacts Harris had provided, she learned that Morrison was now involved in arms dealing, using his position to facilitate weapons sales to the same enemies he had been fighting against. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had tried to kill her to cover his crimes was now openly profiting from them while wearing the uniform she had once respected. Elena spent weeks studying Morrison's patterns, his security arrangements, and his associates. She discovered he was planning a major arms deal in a neutral country, far from military oversight. It would be the perfect opportunity to gather evidence and expose his crimes. But Elena's plans changed when she received word that Foster had died from complications related to his injuries. The medics had done everything they could, but the internal damage from the mortar attack had been too severe. Elena stood at Foster's graveside during a small private ceremony. Harris had arranged for her to attend in disguise, but the pain of losing another teammate burned like acid in her chest. Morrison had now killed 3 of her friends and would face no consequences. That night, Elena made a vow over Foster's grave. She would stop Morrison, not just to prevent future betrayals, but to honor the memory of Johnson, Williams, and Foster. The system had failed them, but she wouldn't. Elena's transformation from loyal soldier to something harder and more focused accelerated after Foster's funeral. She withdrew from the few social connections she had maintained and threw herself into preparation for what she privately called her mission of justice. Harris noticed the change but chose not to interfere. Perhaps he understood that Elena needed to process her grief and anger in her own way. Or perhaps he knew that conventional justice had failed and Elena represented the only hope for stopping Morrison. Elena's opportunity came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated Morrison would be meeting with arms dealers in a remote location to finalize a major weapons transfer. The meeting would take place in an abandoned industrial complex, perfect for Elena's particular skills. The night before she left for the mission, Elena cleaned and checked her rifle one final time. The Barrett M82 had been replaced with a more sophisticated weapon, but the ritual remained the same. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. Elena thought about her teammates as she worked. Johnson with his terrible jokes that somehow always made everyone laugh. Williams and his collection of photos from home that he showed to anyone willing to listen. Foster and his quiet wisdom that had helped her through difficult times. They deserved justice. They deserved to be remembered as heroes, not as casualties of one man's greed and ambition. Elena packed her gear methodically, including equipment that wasn't standard military issue. Her time in the classified unit had given her access to specialized tools and weapons that would help level the playing field against Morrison's security. As she prepared to leave, Elena wrote a letter to her parents, explaining what had happened and why she had to disappear. She couldn't send it yet, but someday they would understand why their daughter had vanished from their lives. Elena's transformation was complete. The young soldier who had hesitated to take a shot without confirmation was gone, replaced by someone harder and more focused. Morrison had created his own worst enemy when he betrayed her team. The abandoned soldier was about to become the avenging angel who would bring justice to those the system had failed to protect. Elena Martinez was dead, but what emerged from her ashes would be far more dangerous than Morrison could imagine. Elena loaded her gear into the civilian vehicle Harris had provided and drove into the night. Behind her, the safe house where she had hidden for months grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the first step toward balancing the scales of justice. The hunt for Morrison was about to begin, and Elena intended to finish what he had started on that ridge months ago. But this time, she would be the one controlling the battlefield, and Morrison would learn what it meant to be abandoned and hunted. Elena's radio crackled one last time as she drove toward her target. "Ghost 1, this is Command. Good hunting." Elena smiled grimly and switched off the radio. From now on, she would be operating alone, exactly the way Morrison had forced her to live. But unlike him, she would use her isolation as a weapon rather than a weakness. The young sniper who had been left to die was about to remind the world why she had earned her reputation. Morrison had underestimated her once, and that mistake would cost him everything. Elena reached the industrial complex 3 hours before dawn, parking her vehicle 2 miles away in dense woodland. The abandoned factory had been closed for over a decade, its rusted machinery and broken windows creating perfect cover for clandestine meetings. Intelligence suggested Morrison would arrive with a small security team to finalize his arms deal with foreign buyers. Elena moved through the darkness like a ghost, her black tactical gear rendering her nearly invisible against the shadows. Years of training had taught her to move silently, to breathe without sound, to become part of the environment she inhabited. Tonight, those skills would be put to their ultimate test. The complex consisted of several large buildings connected by covered walkways and loading platforms. Elena spent an hour surveying the area, identifying potential sniper positions, escape routes, and security weak points. Morrison's people had already arrived and established a perimeter, but their positions were predictable and poorly coordinated. Elena settled into position on the roof of a water tower overlooking the main building. From here, she had clear sight lines to multiple areas, while remaining invisible to ground-based security. Her new rifle, a specialized weapon designed for extreme accuracy, was perfectly suited for the long-range shots she might need to take. Through her scope, Elena watched as Morrison's convoy arrived precisely on schedule. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the main entrance, and Elena felt her heart rate spike as she saw her former captain step out of the lead vehicle. Morrison looked older than she remembered, his face bearing the lines of stress and paranoia that came with a life built on betrayal. Morrison moved with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He was surrounded by 6 bodyguards, all carrying military-grade weapons and wearing tactical gear. Elena recognized 2 of them as soldiers who had served alongside her, men she had once trusted with her life. The sight of her former comrades protecting the man who had murdered their teammates filled Elena with cold rage. Morrison hadn't just betrayed her unit. He had corrupted other soldiers, turning them against everything they had sworn to protect. Elena activated her recording equipment, determined to capture evidence of Morrison's crimes. Her rifle remained steady as she tracked his movement through the scope, but she forced herself to wait. Killing Morrison would be satisfying, but proving his guilt would serve justice better. The arms dealers arrived 30 minutes later in a convoy of unmarked vehicles. Elena counted 12 men, all heavily armed and displaying the professional demeanor of experienced mercenaries. Their leader was a tall man with graying hair who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to dangerous negotiations. Elena adjusted her position slightly to get a better view of the meeting area. The main floor of the factory had been cleared of debris, with several tables set up for displaying weapons samples. Portable lights had been erected to illuminate the space, creating a surreal scene in the abandoned building. Morrison greeted the arms dealer with the familiarity of someone conducting regular business. Elena's recording equipment captured their conversation as they discussed weapon specifications, delivery schedules, and payment arrangements. The scope of Morrison's operation was larger than Elena had imagined, involving millions of dollars in military hardware. "The rifles you requested are top quality," Morrison was saying. "Fresh from military stockpiles, never fired in combat. My contacts ensure they arrive with full documentation." The arms dealer examined several assault rifles that Morrison's men had laid out on the tables. "Your reputation precedes you, Captain. Our clients are very satisfied with previous purchases." Elena's finger tightened on her trigger as she listened to Morrison casually discussing the sale of weapons that would likely be used against American forces. Each rifle, each round of ammunition, represented a potential threat to soldiers like Johnson, Williams, and Foster. Morrison pulled out a tablet displaying shipping manifests and inventory lists. "This next shipment will be our largest yet. Anti-tank missiles, heavy machine guns, and enough ammunition to supply a small army." Elena's blood ran cold as she realized the scale of Morrison's betrayal. He wasn't just selling small arms. He was providing enemies with weapons capable of destroying armored vehicles and aircraft. How many soldiers had already died because of Morrison's greed? The negotiation continued for over an hour, with both sides haggling over prices and delivery methods. Elena recorded everything, building a comprehensive case against Morrison and his network. But as the meeting progressed, she began to realize that killing Morrison might not stop his operation. Morrison was clearly part of a larger organization, with contacts throughout the military supply chain and connections to multiple arms dealers. Eliminating him might simply result in someone else taking over his role, while the network continued operating. Elena was considering her options when everything went wrong. One of Morrison's sentries spotted movement in the tree line and raised an alarm. Suddenly, the complex erupted in activity as security teams moved to investigate potential threats. Elena remained motionless on the water tower, trusting her camouflage and position to keep her hidden. But through her scope, she saw Morrison's paranoia take over as he ordered his men to search every possible hiding spot. "Someone's watching us," Morrison snapped at his security chief. "I can feel it. Search every building, every rooftop. Kill anyone you find." Elena's heart raced as she realized the search would eventually reach her position. The water tower provided excellent visibility, but limited escape routes. If Morrison's men found her, she would be trapped with no way out. The search teams moved methodically through the complex, checking each building with military precision. Elena could hear their radio communications as they coordinated their sweep, and she knew she had perhaps 10 minutes before they reached her position. Elena made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation. Instead of fleeing, she adjusted her rifle and prepared to take the shot that would end Morrison's life. Justice demanded that he pay for his crimes, and this might be her only opportunity. But as Elena settled her crosshairs on Morrison's chest, she noticed something that made her hesitate. Morrison was wearing a ballistic vest beneath his jacket, and his constant movement made a clean shot difficult. Missing would expose her position and likely result in her death. Elena forced herself to wait for the perfect opportunity. Morrison's death had to be certain, and it had to send a message to his network that their actions had consequences. The search teams were getting closer. Elena could hear boots on metal stairs as Morrison's men entered the building beneath her position. In minutes, they would reach the roof access and discover her presence. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger as Morrison momentarily stopped moving, presenting a clear shot. But before she could fire, gunshots erupted from the tree line surrounding the complex. Elena's heart leapt as she realized what was happening. A new force had arrived at the complex, engaging Morrison's security teams in a fierce firefight. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes and figures moving through the darkness. Morrison and the arms dealers immediately took cover, their business meeting forgotten in the face of this unexpected attack. Elena watched as Morrison's carefully planned security perimeter collapsed under assault from multiple directions. Elena shifted her scope to identify the attackers and felt a surge of recognition. The assault team was moving with military precision, using tactics she recognized from her own training. These weren't random criminals or rival arms dealers, they were professional soldiers. Colonel Harris's voice crackled through Elena's earpiece, nearly causing her to gasp in surprise. "Ghost 1, this is Command. We're moving to secure the target area. Maintain overwatch and eliminate any threats to our operation." Elena's mind raced as she realized the implications. Harris had been tracking her, probably through the equipment he had provided. He had used her as bait to draw Morrison into the open, then moved in with his own team to capture the arms dealer and his network. Elena felt a mixture of anger and admiration for Harris's strategy. He had manipulated her desire for revenge to serve his own investigation, but the result would be the same. Morrison would face justice for his crimes. The firefight intensified as Morrison's men tried to establish defensive positions throughout the complex. Elena found herself in the unique position of having a bird's-eye view of the entire battle, able to see threats and opportunities that ground-based forces couldn't detect. Elena keyed her radio. "Command, this is Ghost 1. I have overwatch on the entire complex. Morrison is in the main building with the arms dealer. Multiple hostiles are moving to flank your eastern team." Harris's response was immediate. "Copy, Ghost 1. Engage targets of opportunity and provide cover for our advance teams." Elena shifted her aim to a sniper who was drawing a bead on Harris's soldiers. Her shot was clean and silent, the suppressed rifle dropping the hostile before he could fire. Elena immediately shifted to another target, methodically eliminating threats to the advancing assault team. Morrison's security force was well-trained, but they were outnumbered and caught off guard. Elena watched through her scope as they were systematically overwhelmed by Harris's coordinated assault. Within 30 minutes, most of Morrison's men had been killed or captured. Morrison himself attempted to escape through a rear exit, dragging the arms dealer with him as a human shield. Elena tracked his movement through her scope, waiting for a clear shot that wouldn't endanger the hostage. Morrison reached the loading dock behind the main building and pressed his pistol against the arms dealer's head. "I know you're out there," he shouted into the darkness. "I know someone's been watching us. Show yourself or this man dies." Elena could see the terror in the arms dealer's eyes as Morrison used him as cover. Through her earpiece, she heard Harris ordering his teams to maintain their positions and avoid giving Morrison additional hostages. Morrison was scanning the area frantically, trying to identify the source of the precise shots that had eliminated his snipers. Elena remained motionless, knowing that any movement would give away her position. "You think you can hide from me forever?" Morrison screamed. "I know you're military. I know you're working with Harris. But you made a mistake coming after me." Morrison began moving toward a helicopter that Elena hadn't noticed before. It was parked on a concrete pad behind the complex, its rotors already spinning for immediate takeoff. Elena realized Morrison had prepared this escape route in case his meeting was compromised. Elena adjusted her scope as Morrison approached the aircraft, still using the arms dealer as a shield. The shot would be extremely difficult, requiring her to hit Morrison without harming his hostage or damaging the helicopter's fuel tank. Elena controlled her breathing as she had been taught, letting her heart rate slow and her mind focus entirely on the shot. This was what she had trained for, what she had lived for, since the betrayal that destroyed her old life. Morrison reached the helicopter and began forcing the arms dealer inside. Elena had seconds before her target would be protected by the aircraft's armored hull. Elena's fingers squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure of countless hours of practice. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder as the bullet crossed the distance to its target in less than a second. Morrison's head snapped back as the bullet struck him just above his ballistic vest, precisely where Elena had aimed. He collapsed immediately, his weapon falling harmlessly to the ground as the arms dealer scrambled away from his body. Elena held her position as Harris's teams moved in to secure Morrison's body and arrest the arms dealer. Through her scope, she confirmed that Morrison was indeed dead, the man who had betrayed her team finally brought to justice. Harris's voice came through her earpiece with satisfaction and perhaps a hint of respect. "Excellent shot, Ghost One. Target is down. Mission accomplished." Elena felt no satisfaction in Morrison's death, only a hollow sense of completion. Johnson, Williams, and Foster had been avenged, but their deaths still left a hole in her heart that justice could never fully heal. As dawn approached, Elena watched Harris's teams process the crime scene and arrest the surviving arms dealers. The evidence they recovered would destroy Morrison's entire network, preventing future betrayals and saving countless lives. Elena began breaking down her equipment, preparing to disappear back into the shadows. Her mission was complete, but she knew this victory was only the beginning. Morrison's death would send shockwaves through the criminal networks he had served, creating new opportunities and new threats. Harris contacted her one final time as she prepared to leave. "Ghost One, report to Extraction Point Alpha for debrief." Elena paused before responding. "Negative, Command. Ghost One is returning to base independently." Elena knew she couldn't return to her old life. Too much had changed. Too many lines had been crossed, but Morrison's network was larger than one man, and there were others who needed to face justice for their crimes. Elena climbed down from the water tower and melted back into the darkness, leaving behind the scene of her revenge. But she wasn't disappearing forever. She was evolving into something new, something that corrupt officers and arms dealers would learn to fear. Morrison's death had proven that Elena was more than just a skilled sniper. She was a force for justice in a world where the system sometimes failed those it was meant to protect. The abandoned soldier had become the avenging angel, and her work was just beginning. Elena reached her vehicle as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Behind her, the industrial complex buzzed with activity as investigators cataloged Morrison's crimes and began the process of dismantling his network. Elena drove away from the scene of her first victory, but she knew it wouldn't be her last. Morrison's death had created a void in the criminal underworld, and Elena intended to make sure that void was filled with fear rather than another corrupt officer. The young sniper who had been betrayed and left for dead was gone forever. In her place stood someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. Elena Martinez had found her true calling, and the enemies of justice would soon learn to fear the ghost who hunted in the shadows. 6 months after Morrison's death, Elena had transformed from a vengeful soldier into something far more dangerous. A ghost who haunted the criminal underworld. Operating under multiple identities, she had systematically dismantled 3 arms-dealing networks and exposed corruption reaching into the highest levels of military command. Elena's apartment was a testament to her new life. Multiple passports lay scattered across a desk covered with surveillance photos and intelligence reports. Wall maps tracked the movements of corrupt officials and arms dealers across 6 countries. Her weapons locker contained equipment that wasn't available through normal military channels. The phone rang at precisely midnight, displaying a number Elena had been expecting. Colonel Harris's voice came through encrypted channels, carrying news that would change everything. "Elena, we have a problem. Morrison's death created a power vacuum that something much worse has filled." Elena set down the rifle she had been cleaning and focused entirely on Harris's words. In the months since Morrison's death, she had maintained irregular contact with her former commander, sharing intelligence when their goals aligned. What kind of worse? Harris's voice carried a weight Elena had never heard before. "A new organization calling itself the Crimson Collective has taken over Morrison's networks and expanded them beyond anything we imagined. They're not just selling weapons, they're orchestrating attacks on our forces worldwide." Elena felt her blood chill. Morrison's betrayal had been personal, driven by greed and self-preservation. What Harris was describing sounded like something far more systematic and dangerous. "How bad is it?" "Last week, they supplied the weapons used in an attack that killed 18 soldiers in Afghanistan. Yesterday, intelligence intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something massive on American soil." Elena moved to her wall map, studying the connections she had traced between various criminal organizations. Several patterns she had noticed but dismissed suddenly took on new significance. "Send me everything you have," Elena said quietly. "Elena, this isn't a one-person operation. The Crimson Collective has resources and connections that make Morrison look like a small-time crook. They know you killed Morrison, and they're actively hunting you." Elena absorbed this information without emotion. She had always known that Morrison's death would eventually draw attention from his associates. The surprise was that it had taken 6 months for them to organize a response. "Where do I find them?" Harris was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, I'm not sure you understand what you're up against. Our intelligence suggests the Crimson Collective is backed by hostile foreign governments and has infiltrated our military at levels we're only beginning to understand." Elena thought about Johnson, Williams, and Foster lying dead on that ridge, victims of corruption they never saw coming. Morrison had been just one tentacle of something larger and more malevolent. "Colonel, 18 soldiers died last week because we didn't act fast enough to stop this. How many more will die while we gather intelligence and build cases?" Elena could hear Harris breathing heavily through the encrypted connection. He knew she was right. But he also understood the implications of what she was suggesting. "Elena, if you go after the Crimson Collective, you'll be declared a rogue operative. I won't be able to protect you or provide official support." Elena smiled grimly at her reflection in the darkened window. "When have I ever needed official support?" Harris transmitted a data package containing everything military intelligence had gathered about the Crimson Collective. Elena spent the next 3 hours studying organizational charts, financial records, and operational reports that painted a picture of corruption beyond anything she had imagined. The Crimson Collective wasn't just selling weapons, they were selling national security. Troop movements, classified operational plans, and strategic intelligence were being auctioned to the highest bidder. The organization operated like a corporation, with different divisions handling arms sales, intelligence trafficking, and what could only be described as mercenary services. Elena identified 3 key figures who seemed to control the collective's operations. Markus Volkov, a former Russian Special Forces officer who handled international arms sales. Dr. Sarah Chen, a weapons researcher who had stolen classified designs from defense contractors, and General Robert Hayes, a decorated American officer who provided access to classified military information. Elena felt sick as she read General Hayes's file. He was a legitimate war hero with 30 years of distinguished service, decorated for valor in multiple conflicts. His betrayal represented something far worse than Morrison's greed. It was the corruption of everything Elena had once believed in. Elena spent 2 weeks tracking the collective's operations through financial records and communication intercepts. The organization was planning a major operation in 3 weeks, coinciding with a NATO summit in Washington. The details were fragmentary, but Elena pieced together enough information to realize the attack would target the summit directly. The implications were staggering. A successful attack on the NATO summit would destabilize international alliances and potentially trigger military conflicts worldwide. Elena realized she was looking at an act of warfare disguised as criminal enterprise. Elena's investigation led her to a shocking discovery. The Crimson Collective wasn't just planning to attack the summit. They intended to frame American special forces for the assault. Stolen uniforms, weapons, and identification would make it appear that rogue elements within the U.S. military had turned against their own allies. Elena understood the strategy immediately. Such an attack would destroy America's credibility with its allies while creating internal suspicion and paranoia within the military. The collective would profit from the resulting chaos while weakening the institutions they had infiltrated. Elena contacted Harris with her findings, transmitting encrypted files that detailed the collective's plans. Harris's response came within hours, carrying news that confirmed Elena's worst fears. "Elena, we can't stop this through official channels. General Hayes has allies throughout the Pentagon, and any investigation would alert the collective to our knowledge of their plans." Elena had expected this response. The same corruption that enabled the collective's existence would prevent the system from stopping them. What about unofficial channels? Harris was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, what you're suggesting would make you a terrorist in the eyes of the law. Even if you stopped the attack, you'd spend the rest of your life as a fugitive." Elena thought about the 18 soldiers who had died the previous week, about Johnson, Williams, and Foster lying on that ridge, about the hundreds of NATO representatives who would attend the summit unknowing they were walking into an ambush. "Colonel, I've been dead for over a year. What's one more death certificate?" Elena began planning her assault on the Crimson Collective with the methodical precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. She would need to eliminate all 3 key figures simultaneously, preventing any of them from triggering the NATO summit attack or escaping to rebuild their organization. Elena's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Volkov would be eliminated during an arms deal in Eastern Europe. Dr. Chen would die in an explosion at her secret laboratory. General Hayes would face justice during a classified meeting at the Pentagon itself. Elena knew the plan required her to be in 3 places simultaneously, which meant recruiting help from the only source available, other soldiers the collective had betrayed. Elena spent days tracking down former military personnel who had been cashiered or court-martialed due to information the collective had provided to their enemies. She found 2 men whose records showed they had been destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had been blamed for an intelligence leak that resulted in an ambush in Syria. The real leak had come from General Hayes, but Torres had been convenient scapegoat. Torres had spent 2 years in military prison before being dishonorably discharged. Captain Jennifer Walsh had been accused of selling weapons to insurgents in Iraq. Elena's investigation revealed that Walsh had actually discovered evidence of the arms sales, but had been framed before she could report her findings. Elena approached both soldiers carefully, understanding that they had every reason to distrust anyone claiming to represent military interests. But when she presented evidence that the collective had destroyed their careers, both Torres and Walsh agreed to help stop the NATO summit attack. Elena's team spent a week finalizing their plans. Torres would handle Volkov in Prague, using his language skills and Eastern European contacts to arrange a meeting. Walsh would target Dr. Chen's laboratory in Switzerland, using her expertise with explosives to ensure complete destruction of the facility and its research. Elena reserved General Hayes for herself. His betrayal cut deepest because he represented the corruption of everything she had once respected about military leadership. Hayes would die knowing exactly why justice had finally found him. The three operations launched simultaneously on a cold Tuesday morning. Elena monitored Torres and Walsh's progress through encrypted communications while positioning herself near the Pentagon for her own assault. Torres's operation went flawlessly. Volkov met with apparent arms dealers in a Prague warehouse, never realizing that Torres had replaced his usual contact. Torres eliminated Volkov and two bodyguards with suppressed weapons, leaving no evidence of American involvement. Walsh's assault on Dr. Chen's laboratory was more dramatic, but equally successful. Using military-grade explosives, Walsh destroyed the facility completely, eliminating Chen and decades of stolen weapons research. Swiss authorities would investigate the explosion for months without discovering its true cause. Elena's target required more finesse. General Hayes was attending a classified briefing in the Pentagon's secure section, surrounded by security and legitimate military personnel. Elena had to eliminate him without harming innocents or creating an international incident. Elena had spent weeks studying the Pentagon's security procedures and guard rotations. She entered the building using credentials provided by Harris, moving through familiar corridors toward Hayes's location. Elena found Hayes in a conference room reviewing classified documents, alone except for a single aide. Elena entered quietly, her suppressed pistol already drawn. "General Hayes, I'm here about Johnson, Williams, and Foster." Hayes looked up in confusion, not immediately recognizing the names of Elena's murdered teammates. When understanding dawned in his eyes, he reached for his sidearm. Elena's shot was precise and instantaneous. Hayes died before his weapon cleared its holster, falling forward across the classified documents he had been preparing to sell. Elena secured the documents and Hayes's computer files, gathering evidence of the collective's plans for the NATO summit. The aide, a young lieutenant who had been facing away from the action, turned to find his general dead and Elena already moving toward the exit. "Who are you?" the lieutenant stammered. Elena paused at the doorway. "I'm someone the general should have remembered." Elena escaped the Pentagon using the same routes she had planned weeks earlier. By the time security responded to the lieutenant's report, Elena was miles away and already transmitting the evidence she had recovered to news organizations and intelligence agencies. The evidence Elena leaked revealed the full scope of the Crimson Collective's operations and their plans for the NATO summit. Within hours, international security agencies had arrested dozens of associates and frozen millions in criminal assets. The NATO summit was postponed indefinitely, while security agencies investigated and closed the vulnerabilities the collective had planned to exploit. Elena's actions had prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on international stability. But Elena's victory came at a personal cost. Her assault on the Pentagon had been captured by security cameras, and her identity was now known to law enforcement agencies worldwide. She was officially declared a terrorist and fugitive, with substantial bounties placed on her head. Elena didn't mind. She had saved countless lives and avenged her fallen teammates. The system that had failed Johnson, Williams, and Foster had been forced to confront its own corruption, even if it couldn't acknowledge Elena's role in the process. Colonel Harris contacted Elena one final time as she prepared to disappear permanently. "Elena, what you did saved the NATO summit and exposed corruption that could have destroyed our alliances. But you know you can never come home again. Elena looked out at the city lights from her safe house window, thinking about the path that had led her from loyal soldier to international fugitive. Colonel, home was destroyed on that ridge a year ago. I'm just making sure nobody else loses theirs the same way. Elena destroyed her communication equipment and began preparations for her new life. She would continue hunting the corrupt and criminal, using the skills the military had taught her to protect the innocent from those who would betray them. Elena Martinez, the young soldier who had trusted the system and believed in duty and honor, was truly dead now. In her place stood something harder and more focused, a guardian angel for those the system failed to protect. Elena packed her gear methodically, including weapons and equipment that would help her continue her mission. The Crimson Collective was finished, but there would always be others willing to profit from corruption and betrayal. Elena left the safe house as dawn broke over the city, walking into a future where she would be hunted by the law but necessary for justice. She had found her true calling in the shadows between legal authority and moral necessity. The abandoned young sniper had become a legend whispered in criminal circles and government corridors. Some called her a terrorist, others a hero. But Elena knew the truth was simpler. She was exactly what the world needed, whether it wanted to admit it or not. Elena disappeared into the crowd of early morning commuters, invisible among the people she had sworn to protect. Behind her, investigators would spend years trying to understand how one woman had dismantled an international criminal conspiracy that threatened global security. Elena smiled as she walked away from her old life forever. Johnson, Williams, and Foster could finally rest in peace, knowing their deaths had been avenged and their sacrifice had meaning. Elena would carry their memory forward as she continued her mission of justice in the shadows. The battlefield had indeed changed when Elena reappeared, transformed from abandoned soldier to avenging guardian. Morrison and the Crimson Collective had learned too late that betraying Elena Martinez was a mistake that carried a price higher than they could afford to pay. Elena's war was far from over, but she had proven that even one person could make a difference when motivated by justice and armed with the skills to enforce it. The world would be a safer place because Elena had chosen to stand up when the system failed, even if it meant standing alone.